Welcome everyone to Gamer Meld. Now, I know I'm probably going to hear some things in the comments about me doing 2 talking head videos in a row, but I've got some really big news that I had to discuss. Plus, I have some really awesome videos coming up, along with an RX 6700 XT release stream. And speaking of, there is news that AMD plans to release their new GPUs every week at AMD.com. So you may actually have a shot at getting an RX 6700 XT. And hopefully AIB partners will do the same, to which I will say that I'll have an affiliate link down in the description. It doesn't cost you anything more and it really helps the channel out. So if you wouldn't mind going there when and if you decide to purchase an RX 6700 XT, like I said, it really helps the channel out, doesn't cost you anything at all. Anyway, with all that out of the way, today I've got some big stuff, starting with an update on Nvidia's gaming performance issues, AMD's huge new release, terrible news, and did Nvidia just screw us? Okay, it's news time, and first up for today, if you saw my recent video where I was going over a video by Hardware Unboxed, where basically AMD's GPUs tended to do better than Nvidia's when there was a CPU bottleneck. Well, as you can see here, Igor's lab has basically done the same thing. They've taken a 5800X and they've eliminated 2 cores at a time to be 2, 4, 6, and even 8 cores and see what kind of difference we have. So starting things off, we have 2 cores, and this is actually a 3090 versus a 6900 XT, and as you can see, at first, in Horizon Zero Dawn, Nvidia's does take the lead when it comes to 4K, but when it slowly becomes CPU bottlenecked, even at 1440p, we can see the 6900 XT takes the lead, and it tends to do fairly similar across the way. But of course, 2 cores, pretty much no one has a 6900 XT or 3090 with just 2 cores, so let's move on. Starting things off, we have the 4 core, and you can see once again fairly similar results. And actually you can see that it gets worse and worse as the resolution gets lower and it becomes more and more of a CPU bottleneck versus a GPU bottleneck. And then we move down to 6 cores and it gets a little bit better. So 1440p is right around the same rather than a lead for AMD. And then we have 1080p and then 720p. And finally, and this one I will actually say pretty well surprised me. At maximum settings at 1440p, once again, AMD catches up, but then at 1080p, even with 8 cores, AMD's 6900 XT does a little bit better. Basically, one of the only ways that I can see this really being utilized is potentially future esports games that are in DirectX 12. Maybe we could start seeing a little bit of differences there, just because esports gamers will definitely prioritize FPS versus resolution. Still, even here, we're literally only talking around 10 FPS. Now, moving on, I will say that they seem to find slightly different results from Hardware Unboxed, or at least it seems. As you can see, the 5700 XT does worse than the 3060 Ti in 4K, then worse in 1440p, and really it only starts showing a difference at 720p. Now, when it comes to why this happens, a lot of people I do know said, well, it's just a driver issue. Nvidia is just going to go in and fix that. The issue is that while yes, it almost certainly is something like driver, for example, right here, while Igor's lab also definitely attributes this to driver, it's mostly an issue, at least they believe, of asynchronous compute. So in DirectX 11, the pipeline essentially has to run sequentially, while in DirectX 12, it uses async compute, where different pipelines can effectively be working simultaneously. They believe that there's essentially more, quote, pipeline bubbles in NVIDIA's GPUs. Now, whether this can simply be fixed with the driver update, we don't know. They actually mention certain things like engines being optimized for AMD's hardware. So all in all, it could be a mixture of some hardware issues. There's really likely quite a bit of different things that it can be, but potentially they can at least make it a little bit better with a driver update, maybe. I really think more tests need to be done. Plus, once again, these are very, very specific guidelines. A DirectX 12 game, we don't even know how many of the games more testing needs to be done. And ultimately, I think what it really shows is that what you want to do, you want to get similar hardware across the board. You don't want to get a significantly better GPU or a significantly better CPU, though the focus, as usual, should still mostly be your GPU, just because that's where your bottleneck's going to lie most of the time. Now, moving on, AMD officially announced today their 3rd gen EPYC processors, and it is pretty impressive. Thanks to their new 8-core chiplets, memory performance has been significantly improved just because it's all on one die now. As you can see here, though, of course, this is based on AMD's metrics, first-party metrics you rarely want to 100% believe, but essentially we're looking at upwards of double the performance compared to Intel's 8280. Now, you might be wondering, why in the world are we comparing a 64 core to a 28 core? Well, keep in mind that right now, at least, this is the price per 1,000. We're looking at $7,800 for the 7763, double the performance, while Intel's Platinum, while it's gone down significantly, has an MSRP of around $10,000. So it should be compared on a price to performance metric. Anyway, with that said, one thing you may notice is that AMD's Milan actually has lower base clocks and higher boost clocks versus last gen's Rome. And the reason for that, at least AnandTech believes, is because the Uncore power consumption actually got a regression in Milan versus Rome. And the reason they believe that is essentially the IOD. The simple fact is that the new IOD is still 14 nanometers. They actually said that the power is higher when idle, but still, when we're talking double the performance versus their competitor, that's obviously a massive difference. And next up for today, I have some terrible news. For those who've been following the channel, you know that a little while back, Nvidia basically suggested that things are going to be really tight throughout Q1, ultimately saying Q2 should start looking a little bit better. Now, I will say that when they said Q1, they were referring to their own calendar, which actually ends in April, with the second quarter going from May to July. So it is different from what you would think when you think first, second quarter. Regardless, DigiTimes is reporting that it looks like it's unlikely to even ease in Q3, meaning there's almost a guarantee we're not going to be able to get GPUs throughout the summer, and things aren't going to be back to normal until potentially next year. And with all of that said, there is some other news going around, but I have a bit of an update to that. Basically, if you've been keeping up with the RTX 3060, you know that Nvidia kind of touted it as this anti-mining GPU made for gamers. And what they did is they effectively added an Ethereum mining limiter, where when you start mining with Ethereum, the GPU's performance significantly takes a dip. We're talking around 50%. Well, the news now is that using just a new driver that Nvidia themselves released, that's completely changed, and now the 3060, it essentially breaks it for the GPU. That is obviously horrible. I'd actually written a huge thing, which is sort of why I'm doing a talking head video, because it took a lot of time and then finding this out and going back through it, but I had written everything, just really mad, I guess you could say, that this would happen, because for one, it would prove that the whole BIOS and driver working in sync makes no sense, because this happens only with the driver update. But with all of that said, what we ended up finding out is that it isn't that simple. There's actually a couple things going on here. For one, it requires it to be connected to a monitor. Now, obviously, that isn't necessarily a huge deal or anything like that. You can fake that. There's stuff to likely get around that. But when there's more than one GPU, it seems to go back to not using the full hash rate. Meaning, if you're a miner with any more than one GPU, it will limit your hash rate. See, a lot of people kind of thought this was basically a beta driver released for developers by Nvidia through, I believe it was Windows developer programs. That was a beta driver, and people essentially thought it doesn't have the limiter in it. but apparently it does. And the reason I think Nvidia did this is essentially to allow gamers who just have one GPU and kind of want to mine on the side to be able to do that. And obviously that is still a little bit disheartening, but the main drivers of buying all of these GPUs, I don't mean GPU driver, I mean the main influence as to where all these GPUs are going when you're seeing, 100 GPUs. It's these mining farms that buy tons and tons of GPUs. And with this limiter, it absolutely would still stop them. So it does seem like these cards are still limited. And from, I believe, a comment, they mentioned that basically anyone who uses anything other than PCI Express X16, it doesn't work. And that's a big deal because that effectively means all the risers that cryptocurrency miners use will not work. So ultimately, this isn't terrible news. And of course, I'm not calling out, anyone who originally discussed this just because you would have had to have more than one 3060 to try out to find this out. And honestly, I don't really think anyone, would have thought to do that, would have thought, oh, it's working for one GPU, but maybe it won't work for more. Well, the reason we found out is because this is a crypto mining blog. So of course, these guys likely said, oh yes, let's get all the 3060s we bought or however they found this out, and let's test them. And then they found out, oh, it's not really helping. So while that does it for today, I do hope you liked the video. Hopefully it isn't all bad news, although not being able to get GPUs until potentially next year is still absolutely terrible. Once again, though, if you're looking to purchase an RX 6700 XT, definitely, if you wouldn't mind clicking the link in the description. Once again, it does help the channel out. But anyway, I do have a question. If none of the GPUs were out of stock, which one would you buy? Let me know down in the comments below. And if you liked the video, please subscribe. And as always, have a great day.